in July of 1818, in the midst of a long walking tour with his close friend Charles Brown, Keats found himself in Mull, the second largest island off the coast of Scotland in the Inner Hebrides. And there, he and Brown found themselves in the midst of terrible weather, cold, rainy, and they got very wet during the day, walking through boggy land, and ended up sleeping in very poor accommodations that night. And this went on for several days during that time of the trip, and Keats became very ill. And at one point in August, he wrote to a friend that he hoped he would live to see the next 3 years. He was writing about the prospect of his brother George going to live in America, in Kentucky, in fact, and he was wondering if he himself would be able to make it. Why? Keats knew, as a man trained in medicine, the symptoms of tuberculosis, and he knew that a chronic sore throat was one of them. His brother Tom would die of tuberculosis in December of 1818 after Keats nursed him for a very long time. Earlier, Keats's mother died of tuberculosis. So it was an ailment that ran in the family. The point is that from really July of 1818 until the end of his days in February of 1821, Keats had a sense that his life would be short. He knew that he was a candidate for tuberculosis, and it was a disease that really haunted him throughout the remainder of his life. When he returned from Mull, as I said, he did nurse his brother Tom, his youngest brother Tom, through his own tuberculosis. Terrible, terrible disease. Vomiting, fever, diarrhea, spitting up blood, horrific. And there was Keats taking care of his brother through it, and he was there when his brother died. Well, this is December 1st, 1818. Throughout the year 1819, Keats continues to suffer symptoms that are associated with tuberculosis, till by the time we get to the fall of 1819, he's pretty sure that he has it, and he is expecting the worst. In February of 1820, his brother George returns from America. He has money trouble. He's trying to get a business going there. And he and John quarrel, really for the first time, rather viciously, about money. And Keats ultimately agrees to give George almost all of his inheritance. Soon after this, February 3rd, 1820, Keats, late at night, rides outside a coach in London to go from one place to another. He becomes extremely ill. He returns home to his dwelling, at this time in Wentworth Place in Hampstead, near Hampstead Heath, where he lives with Charles Brown. And Charles Brown immediately says to his friend John, "Go to bed." And just as Keats is going to bed, he has a horrible hemorrhages and spits up a large amount of blood. And he sees the blood on his white pillowcase. And he holds the candle to the blood and he says, "Do you see that spot? In that spot is my death warrant." He knew by the color of the blood that he was actually starting to cough up his own lungs, and he knew that he did not have long to live. And indeed, he was right. Barely more than a year did he have to live. So this is going on during the time when Keats is writing his greatest poems. It's as if he does have a skull on his desk looking at him as he composes these great works. Another train of events going on during these years from 1818 until Keats's death is that he falls passionately in love with a young woman named Fanny Brawne. He first notices her in December of 1818, right around the time his brother Tom dies. Her family was living in the other half of the house at Wentworth Place. Charles Brown owned the home. Charles and John lived in one part of the house and the Browns lived in another. Fanny was a little younger than Keats. She was especially vivacious. She was very intelligent, charming. She had a very quirky and elegant sense of fashion. She made her own hats. She made her own dresses. Keats often called her a minx. He saw her as being overly flirtatious. Of course, he loved that about her, but sometimes he felt that she was too flirtatious with other men, the typical jealousy of someone who's madly in love. So throughout 1819, he develops this relationship with Fanny Brawne, and they become unofficially engaged summer of 1819, then they become officially engaged a little later on in late 1819. But all the while, Keats knows that he will have a hard time marrying her. Why? Because one, he has very little money. He has yet to make a fortune or any kind of income as a poet or as a reviewer of London theater. And also because he's sick. He's worried that he may simply not live to enjoy a marriage with her. Well, soon after this hemorrhage of February 3rd, 1820, he knows that the only way that he might get better is if he goes to a warmer clime. The thought was that the damp climate in London was bad for tuberculosis. So you see this exchange of very tortured, intense letters between Fanny and John throughout 1820, with Keats professing his desperate love for her, but also his desperate fear that he may not be able to consummate his relationship with her. And when he does finally go to Rome in September of 1820, he fears that he may never see her again, to the extent that when he receives letters from her in Rome, he's afraid to open them, because they symbolize to him a life that he will probably never get to live. So when he is finally buried after dying in February of 1821, he has those unopened letters from Fanny buried with him. So what we see is this tension between love and death in the great years of Keats's poetry writing. He is someone who understands what he describes in Ode to a Nightingale, the weariness, the fever, and the fret. Here, where men sit and hear each other groan, where youth grows pale and spectre thin and dies. Where but to think is to be full of sorrow and leaden-eyed despairs. Where new love cannot last beyond tomorrow, nor can beauty pine for the lustrous eyes of the romantic partner. I'm mangling that last part a little bit because my memory's failing me. But the point is that Keats in Ode on a Grecian Urn and in Ode to a Nightingale is very aware of the pain of time. That time is a realm that destroys us, that makes us sick, that rots our lungs, that ultimately destroys all that we value. But on the other hand, what is there? There is love that is tied in these poems with a kind of ideal, a hope to transcend the pain of time, through a sort of love that lifts one out through its ecstasy and joy of the pain of time, but also love that can be depicted in art and therefore be eternal. So this is the great tension in Keats's great years between the pain of time, but yet time is what generates beautiful women and beautiful roses in the first place. And the seduction of the absolute, the eternal, the ideal, but of course that very absolute of the eternal, the ideal, takes one out of time and can alienate one. So love and death, what we might call the pain, but yet the joy of transience, and the calm, but yet the aloofness of the permanent. These are the great dialectics in Keats's great poetry.